Never mind the bollocks, here's Horror Mike.
Greetings, friends. Horror Mike here. Today we're going to be looking at part 1 of what will be a multi-part video series about Greg Sadowski's incredible book, Action, Mystery, Thrills, originally published by Fantagraphics Books in 2011. This book contains comic book covers and backgrounds and history to those comic books, as written by Greg Sadowski, covering the Golden Age years from 1933 to 1945. Pre-code horror, crime, and sci-fi comic book enthusiasts may recognize the name Greg Sadowski. He wrote the fantastic book Four Color Fears, a great volume on pre-code horror and sci-fi comic books, which I highly recommend. If you are a collector or fan of the pre-code comic books of the late 1940s and 1950s, you'll want to check out Four Color Fears. The link is in the description. This book, Action, Mystery, Thrills, presents some of the most amazing comic book covers I have ever seen in one volume, and the reproductions are fantastic. In part 1, we are going to cover the years 1933 through 1939, beginning with what is considered to be the first comic book ever published in 1933. But first, let me read the description on the back of the book. During the golden age of comic books, the surest way to separate a potential customer from his dime was a striking cover. This is why publishers always save their top artist for this prized spot. Action, Mystery, Thrills presents 176 fully restored, full-sized classics, arranged chronologically to follow the evolutionary trends resulting from the industry's monthly battle for newsstand attention. This long overdue collection also includes extensive historical commentary by editor-designer Greg Sadowski. So let's jump right into it. When you open the book, you get several fantastic photos from the 1930s and 40s. I love the way that Sadowski lays this out. A happy kid with tip-top comics. Look at that wall of comics, folks. One of my favorite photos. Your classic little street corner shop selling everything, including, as you can see, hanging above the old gent, Blue Beetle, Master Comics, All-Star Comics, Action Comics, World's Best Comics, and so forth. And judging from that issue of Action Comics number 35, hanging right above the proprietor's head, this photo was taken in 1941. Love this 2-page spread. That is just beautiful. And then, of course, the foreword by Ty the Guy Templeton. You are looking at the first comic book ever produced, 1933. Funnies on Parade. From the Greg Sadowski description. Generally considered to be the first comic book, the 32-page Funnies on Parade was created at Connecticut's Eastern Color Printing, a major printer of newspaper comic sections. It was marketed as a giveaway, obtainable by sending in coupons from Procter & Gamble soap products, and it featured strips from the McClure and McNaught syndicates. But the first 10-cent comic book, which was published in July of 1934, is none other than Famous Funnies number 1. Also published by Eastern, Famous Funnies number 1 was the first 10-cent newsstand comic book. Next up, New Fun number 3, April of 1935. Cover by Clem Gretter. The first comic book to contain entirely new material, publisher Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson's New Fun, hit the newsstands in early 1935. Mickey Mouse Magazine number 3, November of 1935, Walt Disney Studios. Another oversized 8.5 by 11.5 inches book to appear in 1935, Mickey Mouse magazine sported simple yet beautifully drafted cover images. The Comics magazine, cover by Sheldon Meyer. William Cook and John Mahone started at Wheeler Nicholson's National Allied, but left in early 1936, taking along Lloyd Jacquet to form a new comic book company, Comics Magazine Incorporated. Their first title, The Comics Magazine, made its debut in May of 1936. By the second issue, that appellation shrunk on the covers in deference to funny pages. Wow, That Magazine, number 2, August of 1936, cover by Will Eisner. David McKay Publications began publishing comics in early 1936, with the 6 newsstand comic book King Comics followed in April of 1937 by Ace Comics. In between, McKay released the 4-issue Wow, What a Magazine, a part reprint, part original title that joined editor Samuel Jerry Iger with artist Will Eisner. Next up, Funny Picture Stories number 2, December of 1936, cover by William Allison. You may have noticed the word comics has yet to appear prominently in any of the covers. At this time, it was still up in the air what exactly to call these new periodical. Comics eventually won out, with funnies losing steam by the early 1940s. Star Comics, number 1, February of 1937, cover by W.C. Brigham. Harry H. Chesler Jr. established the country's first comic book sweatshop in a Manhattan warehouse in early 1936, providing material for both National Allied and Comics Magazine Inc., Star Comics, and Star Ranger. Before it closed in the late 1940s, Chesler's shop was the point of entry for scores of comic book artists. Another packaging service run by Will Eisner and Jerry Iger quickly followed on Chesler's heels, with other independent shops to come. Detective Picture Stories, number 4, March of 1937. The first comic book devoted to a single theme, Detective Picture Stories, arrived in late 1936. Western Picture Stories, number 3, April of 1937. With a cover date of February 1937, Western Picture Stories tied Chesler's Star Rangers, number 1, in becoming the first Western comic book. Detective Picture Stories, number 5, April of 1937. The final issue's cover of Detective Picture Stories features the first masked comic book hero, the Clock, drawn by his creator, artist-writer George Brenner. In late 1937, Brenner moved to Quality Comics and continued his signature character in Feature Funnies, a book that combines newspaper strip reprints with original material. Detective Comics, number 6, 1937, cover by Craig Fliessel. Detective Comics number 1, March of 1937, was the last National Allied title created during the Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson reign. Advertised as a high-stepping detective magazine and pictures, it was helmed by talented editor Vin Sullivan, who had the graphic sense to allow Craig Fliessel's stirring cover images to stand on their own. After McKay started the feature book reprint series in 1937, he allowed Thompson to create 2 original one-shots, Red Eagle and Gangbusters. Amazing Mystery Funnies, number 3, November of 1938, cover by Bill Everett. This cover represents Everett Creations' Skyrocket Steel and Dirk the Demon. Action Comics number 7, December of 1938, cover by Joe Shuster. Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson lost control of his company, now called Detective Comics, Inc., or DC. Just as Action number 1, June of 1938, hit the stands, introducing Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's industry-transforming creation. This was Superman's second cover appearance. Keen Detective Funnies, January of 1939, cover by Terry Gilkison. Keen Detective Funnies was Centaur's revamp of Cook and Mahone's Detective Picture Stories. Crackajack Funnies, number 8, January of 1939, cover by James Gary. Dell continued to create new titles in 1936 In 1937, with the newspaper strip reprint anthologies The Funnies and The Comics. Starting in mid 1938, its fourth comic book, Crackajack Funnies, featured a mixture of original and reprinted material. Star Ranger Funnies, January of 1939, cover by Jack Cole. Born in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, Jack Cole learned how to cartoon via the Landon School of Illustration and Cartooning Correspondence Course. Jumbo Comics, number 5, January of 1939, Will Eisner. Fiction House's Jumbo Comics was the first title completely packaged by the new partnership Eisner and Iger. True to its name, the first 8 jumbos were oversized 10.5 by 14.5 inches, just shy of tabloid size. Tip Top Comics, number 34, February of 1939, cover by Paul Bourdonnais. Hitting the newsstands in early 1936, Tip Top Comics was the first title published by a newspaper syndicate, United Feature. Amazing Mystery Funnies, February of 1939, cover by Bill Everett. Amazing Mystery Funnies held on with a respectable run of 23 issues, which ended in 1940. Wonder Comics, number 1, May of 1939, cover by Will Eisner. DC accountant Victor Fox hired Will Eisner to create another Superman based upon its popularity. Somewhat half-heartedly, Eisner came up with Wonder Man, introduced in Fox's first title, Wonder Comics. DC immediately sued and won. The most damaging piece of evidence may have been the similarity of the Wonder cover with Action number 7 shown earlier. Mystery Men Comics, number 2, September of 1939, cover by Will Eisner and Lou Fine. Four Color, number 1, September of 1939, cover art attributed to Chester Gould. Four Color was conceived by Dell as a tryout series for its various licensed properties. While not certifiably the work of Dick Tracy creator Chester Gould, this cover certainly captures his breathless approach to graphics, with Tracy bounding the stairs 4 at a time. Speed Comics, October of 1939, cover attributed to Bob Powell. Speed Comics was originally published by Frank Temerson's Brookwood Publishing until he sold the title in mid-1941 to Fox employee turned publisher Alfred Harvey. Keen Detective Funnies, October of 1939, cover by Ben Thompson. Smelling Money, Centaur entered the superhero fray pronto. In this issue, the masked marvel was prominently displayed above the title, though curiously with the hero only occasionally pictured. Artist-writer Ben Thompson came up with the reclusive antisocial hero, who would suddenly appear, correct some mischief, and then quickly return to seclusion. Amazing Mystery Funnies, October of 1939, cover by Leo Mori. That same month, the Phantom of the Fair and Speed Centaur alternated on Amazing Mystery Funnies covers, tossing Skyrocket Steel to the comic book junk heap. Jumbo Comics, number 10, October of 1939, cover by Will Eisner and Lou Fine. Will Eisner drew the early Jumbo covers through issue number 12. Wonder World Comics, number 7, November of 1939, once again, cover by Will Eisner and Lou Fine. Mickey Mouse Magazine, Volume 5, number 2, November of 1939, Walt Disney Studios. Another lesson in the power of bold graphic simplicity. This Halloween cover, featuring Goofy, appeared toward the end of the Mickey Mouse Magazine 60-issue run. Popular Comics, number 45, November of 1939, cover by Bill Eli. Introduced with a February 1936 cover date, Popular Comics was Dell's first standard-sized comic book. Mystery Men Comics, number 4, November of 1939, cover by Will Eisner and Lou Fine. While Superman's unprecedented success led most publishers to aim their material squarely at preteens, Will Eisner had a steadfast belief that graphic narrative could appeal to an older audience. To test his theory, by the late 1939, his covers had become more sexually charged, with distressed damsels wearing less and less each month. Mystery Men Comics number 5, December of 1939, cover by Will Eisner and Lou Fine. Mystery Men cover star The Green Mask began his career as another post-DC lawsuit Fox hero with no powers apart from a costume, mask, and gun. Superman number 3, winter of 1939, cover by Joe Shuster. In addition to starring in Action Comics, by mid-1939, Superman had his own syndicated strip, plus a new self-titled quarterly comic book. Joe Shuster had to start a studio of artists to keep up with demand. Marvel Mystery Comics, number 2, December of 1939. Cover by Charles Mazoujan. With partners John Mahone and Frank Torpey. In 1939, Lloyd Jaquette started a new packaging service, Funnies Inc., taking with him the best Centaur artists, including Bill Everett and Carl Burgos. Its first comic book, Marvel Comics number 1, for timely publisher Martin Goodman, introduced Everett's Submariner and Burgos' Human Torch. The second cover, with the title changed to Marvel Mystery, featured the Angel wearing a costume that looks vaguely familiar. That ends our look at the comics and comic book covers represented in Action Mystery Thrills. Part 2 will deal with the comic books from 1940 through 1942. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.